Okay, y'all. Let's get it going in just a minute here. up? What's up? Let's go. About ready. Let's go. Yeah, you know what time it is. Let's go. That's our boy Rooks. Rooks G. Yo, all the links for that right there in the video description. What's up, y'all? Tonight we're covering Bret Easton Ellis's new novel, The Shards. Came out last year. This is the 5th analysis of Bret Easton Ellis that I've done. Of course, I've done Lunar Park, American Psycho. What else? The Informers, The Shards, and we did one other one. But tonight we're doing The Shards and Less Than Zero. I decided to add Less Than Zero because I want to give this some context. So my favorite Bret Easton Ellis book is Lunar Park. I mean, I think it supersedes all the other books. It's beautiful. It has a beauty. It's beautiful. And you can go back and watch the analysis of that book. Of course, American Psycho was our big one. That's the big Bret Easton Ellis. And Less Than Zero, I got to say, is probably the darkest of BEE's books. I think I've read all of them except Imperial Bedrooms, so that'll probably be the last one that we do. And so this one's different. Okay, so this one is a new novel, and of course it's a kind of, all of his works are kind of a meta novel. Now, to start off, are kind of meta novels. Now we've talked about how there's a difference between the author and the speaker the second that you put the pen to the page, right? There's a vast difference between the two. And what is different about this one is it takes a lot from Lunar Park and also from Less Than Zero, because it's set in the fall of 1981 at the Buckley School at Bret Easton Ellis's prep school in L.A., and the speaker's name is Bret. Okay, but that belies I guess the immediacy of the novel and also the unreliable narrator. And the unreliable narrator in this is Stark. Now, I got to say, of course there's going to be spoilers because we're doing a full analysis of the book. But I will say that from the start, I had a feeling, not knowing really anything about the book, but I had a feeling just knowing Ellis's work that all was not going to be what it seemed. It's not it goes into a kind of detective story at times, and it functions as a kind of a puzzle piece. But the puzzle piece is like the broken mirror shards, right? We're obviously, knowing what we do about literature, and we've covered these themes so many times. I had a feeling that the speaker was going to be, spoiler, that I had a feeling that the speaker was going to be the perpetrator in this. And that's just because of little cues in the language, little clues throughout the thing, and also the fact that the novel is set, and a lot of his works are set in this kind of, I don't know what else to call it other than a kind of postmodern nihilistic world where everything is surface. There's surfaces. American Psycho was like that. It was all about surface. But what we found when we did our American Psycho analysis is that the surfaces in that tend to refract somehow back on the complexity of the novel so that it functions as both a satire and something uniquely true on its surface, so that we wonder whether Bateman is doing the things that he's doing, that he's saying he's doing in the novel. And I think that the work functions as both a confession and, like he says, a confession that's meant nothing. It's like there's everything and nothing in the book. This one is different because we get the kind of latter day seeds for what became of the other novels within this, and that is really that really plays a big part in Lunar Park. Lunar Park is all about like reflecting back on Patrick Bateman. Patrick Bateman becomes a visceral character within the novel that the speaker is looking at as if he's materialized. Remember the Furby and all that stuff. And so we get this sort of darkness that materializes for the speaker, and we wonder in this whether the character of the trawler, who is the serial killer that is stalking L.A. in 1981, is the speaker himself. Okay, so here's what it's about. So the speaker's name is Bret, right? It's Bret Easton Ellis, but it's not Bret Easton Ellis, but it is. And Bret is a senior in high school at the Buckley School, which is a real school, real prep school, independent league of schools, in 1981. And he is making his way through a turby. That's what it is. It was a turby. He's making his way through. It has the little eyes, and it materializes into a black spirit in Lunar Park. Anyway, Bret is making his way through senior year without his parents. His parents are noticeably absent. He's alone at the house except for Rosa and for his dog, Shinji. And he has a bunch of friends, that he sort of is living, he's having senior year with. And then all of a sudden, this character, Robert, appears. Is his name Robert? I think his name's Robert. Yeah, Robert appears. And Robert Mallory appears senior year, and that's it. Sort of throws them for a loop. At least it throws Bret sort of out of his element. And what happens is that one of the characters goes missing, and Bret notices that he's seen Robert before at a movie. He went to see The Shining at the Echoplex or whatever. And he saw Robert, and then months later, he sees Robert at school. Robert appears from a school in Chicago, and immediately Robert is like super popular, super good looking, and he makes his way into their friend group very easily. And and then Bret starts like as the book progresses. There's a lot of what's usual in his novels, and what is I relate to a lot in this, which is that there is a lot of the life of prep school, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on. Okay, now people have asked about like, is this book a confession? Right? Is it his memoir? Well, it is and it isn't, because again, I think that the speaker is a lot different from it, and it's no like surprise all of the Skittle stuff in the book, because that's appeared throughout all of his books. But it's more so in this, and it seems to be more immediate to the character, and I can't relate to that, but I can relate to what he goes through with his friends, going to parties, hanging out. They have the friends, they live in a place where like they seem like nothing will ever happen to them, and like their futures are assured, and everybody has money, and they're just extremely privileged, right? And Bret sort of knows that, but they operate within this system. And eventually, Bret starts to notice that like that people are going missing, and there's a cult that's permeated the L.A. scene, especially the Bel Air, Sherman Oaks, Century City sort of landscape that he paints in this book, and that he also does in Less Than Zero. And the cult is a Manson. They're a Charlie-like cult, man, but they're called Riders of the Afterlife, which is, I guess, a combination of Riders on the Storm, Riders of the Purple Sage, Manson family, and they're freaky, and they're doing home invasions and stealing people's pets. And then eventually he notices a pattern with these things, and that somebody that they know, which he alludes to at the beginning of the novel, if we only knew what we knew later, goes missing. And no one seems to really care. And he confronts the family of the guy. His name's Matt. He confronts his dad. His dad is the only one who has suspicions that maybe something else happened to him. But all of the circumstances seem to say that either he drowned in a pool, which is reminiscent of a kind of Brian Jones Los Angeles death in a swimming pool, related back to Jim Morrison. There's a lot of Jim Morrison in this that's not specifically stated, but you can see the kind of echoes of it, right? With Jim Morrison made a film called Highway, HWY, which is about a serial killer in the Mojave Desert, which also sort of takes its cue from The End, right? He took a face from the ancient gallery and he walked on down the hall, right? And there's a lot of masks. The idea of the mask is one of the motifs in the book, and personae, and what people reveal, and whether they are simply a mask, whether people that he meets are all mask and there's nothing beneath. And that's one of his sort of problems as he goes through the narrative. Well, anyway, he seems to think that Robert Mallory is the guy that did this, and he confronts him about it a number of times. And what ends up happening is, and this is probably the biggest reason that I thought that Bret is the troll. It's ambiguous in the end, but it seems to be clear that both nothing is happening and everything is happening. That Bret, the character of Bret, seems to be this character of the trawler, and the trawler is different from the cult that's operating called Riders of the Afterlife. The trawler is a serial killer that the newspaper has named because it has something to do with how he stages the bodies. Okay, so there's a series of people that go missing. There are pets that go missing in threes, and then it finally culminates in a person going missing, and then later they find the body, and it's been rearranged in such a gross way that it looks like a kind of postmodernistic dead tech / back to nature Riders of the Afterlife, and yet Richard Ramirez type of sacrifice. There's a lot of obviously he's taking a lot from Richard Ramirez and the Night Stalker, and kind of putting all of those factual elements into something that is ultimately beyond truth. And I'll get to what I mean by that, but they find the characters, and the characters are either super glued shut with cement, with rubber cement, and stuffed with dead fish, and then there are animals decapitated and rearranged in specific ways, and it all looks like a sacrifice. But the reason that I thought that Bret was the trawler was because when Robert Mallory gets to school, he starts following him, and Robert notices that he's following him, and then confronts him and says, "I don't like being followed." And so this leads Bret through a circuitous passageway into the fact that he thinks that Robert is aware that Bret is following him and that he's the serial killer. But what ends up happening, and this is pretty clever. So spoiler here for the novel, if you ever read the novel. I've read the novel, so you don't have to, but I think they're making a television show, an HBO series out of this. So, and what's interesting with that is that a lot of the series the series plural that we see, especially on cable television in the last 20 years, take a lot from Bret Easton Ellis. I mean, Gossip Girl, Euphoria, Skins, a lot of these things take their kind of cue from a sort of a Bret Easton Ellis like landscape. And so it wouldn't surprise me remember I reviewed the latest work of total depravity, Saltburn, that came out on Netflix. I reviewed that for the members. Do you remember how gross that one was? It's not Bret Easton Ellis just because it's gross. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying because oftentimes his work is not that. But what it is it deals with a guy making his way into an elite family and then tearing it all apart. which is kind of an inverse of what happens with his works. But all of those things tend to come from a sort of a landscape of literature that's inherent just to Bret Easton Ellis, and you have to give him credit for that. It seems to just come straight from him. So I think there will be a TV show or a series made from this book, and that'll be another one that we can add to the list that we've covered here, because these things keep popping up. But what happens in the end of the book is that he confronts Mallory, and then follows him to an apartment building where he confronts him, and he says, "I know what you did. I know what you did." And the guy there are two different lenses. It's like we're looking at the events through a glass darkly. We're looking at things through Bret's eyes, but I can clearly see that flip it around and he's the killer, if that makes sense. And what he does is he ends up attacking him, and then he gets stabbed. He gets stabbed, and then he gets bit on the arm, and then he pushes the guy off a balcony, and he falls down to another balcony, and then he ends up falling off a balcony. Now, the events, and he dies. That Robert Mallory dies, and then Bret goes to his friends, and he says, "Don't worry about it. He's gone. We have nothing to worry about anymore." And one of his girlfriends looks at him, and she looks down at his arm and notices there's just a bite mark, what she thinks is a bite mark, but he's been stabbed. But you can't tell if it's a bite or a stab mark, and that she's the one who bit him in an earlier scene. And it's crazy because when it's all over, Robert is dead, and it's followed a series of events where people keep getting pushed off balconies and collapsing, and it fits the narrative that Bret has painted against Robert at his school. He goes in at one point and he talks to his headmaster, and he says, I think this guy's the serial killer. And the guy says, "Well, he was in here just last week, and he seemed to think that you were involved in something." So it's like you're questioning whether the guy is one step ahead of him and who's more psycho, right? And in the end, there's no absolution, there's no resolution, and it's just that Bret lives, Robert dies, and then he goes on to write his books, and then he's at a book signing in a kind of a postscript, kind of an epilogue. He's at a book signing, and he sees his old friend Tom, who's one of the major characters in this, and Tom confronts him and says, she seemed to think it was you. Was it you? And he's like, and we don't know. And so the point of the book really is, I hesitate to just call it postmodern. It's not just postmodernism. It's just a label we can tack on something that we've covered so much here with Cormac McCarthy and Don DeLeo and all these people. But this is something different. It's a kind of teenage prologue to postmodernism within the bounds of a plastic world in L.A. where nothing seems real anyway, and nothing seems to matter. And part of this is it's negative capability. So what happens is that Bret, because he has no parents. His parents are off yachting somewhere for 3 months. They leave him at home. He's going to prep school. He's got all this money. He gets eventually. He also, there's a lot of creeper stuff in this. One of the dads of his friend is a movie producer. His dad is also involved in movies and real estate and all that stuff. But her dad is a movie producer named Terry Schaefer, and he goes to the Beverly Hills Hotel, I guess, and to the Polo Lounge, which he talks about. I remember the Polo Lounge from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But he goes to all these, La Scala, all these fancy places as a teenager, but in his prep school uniform. And eventually he pitches his novel to Terry Schaefer, who offers him a creeper quid pro quo. And Bret is so jaded by all this stuff that he gives into it and doesn't care. And then later he confronts Robert Mallory, and Robert Mallory even says, I don't want to hang out around these people. And he's like, why not? And it turns on him. Whereas Mallory seemed to be the guy with no values and nothing. And now Bret uses that sort of nihilism like against him and says, oh, come on, man. What is this, too much for you? And Robert Mallory's like, yeah, I don't like hanging around these Skittles people and these creeps. And he's like, it's whatever. And the real problem with this, the real pain in this novel is the fact that this is what happens in Less Than Zero, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But it's the same thing that happens in Less Than Zero and in a lot of his novels, is that he makes continuous references to the fact that nothing on the outside seems to matter. Like he says 2 or 3 times that, over the course of 1981, like Reagan's running for election, and then Reagan becomes president. But nothing it doesn't matter to them. It could be anything to them. The only things that matter to them are sex, drugs, mainly. So Bret can. The other thing about this is that, just another diversion here, is that the character Bret cannot get to sleep without Valium. He buys Ludes from one of his friends in Less Than Zero. Like he's popping Nembutal a couple times, and that one gets more into serious drugs. But one of the signposts that occurs throughout the book is that he cannot go to sleep without taking downers, or some kind of, taking benzos. And when he goes to sleep, he has to fall into a blackness. Like he just wants to wash it all away. And part of the problem that we can see this with the character is from the outside looking in here. Like as if we're watching a movie, as if we're looking at Hollywood like it's a spectacle and like we're watching it on a screen. But we're talking about what we think is a real person's life. But then there's another translucent haze in front of us, this kind of another screen that is the screen of the author talking about himself as the speaker. And so what we see is that the characters want meaning, they want substance in life, but they don't have any because they have everything, they have nothing. And that whenever Bret goes to talk to someone about anything, they sort of look at him with a glazed, not even a glazed look. It's like they look at him clear-eyed, but the glaze has completely taken over the normal sheen of the eyeball. So this is what I think is like sort of the ultimate. This is like the pinnacle of postmodernism in a different. And if we're looking at a mountainscape, we sort of have the visceral bloodshed and violence of Blood Meridian, and then we have the ultimate postmodernism of tech and the X and the Xerox machine and sort of a technological death, techno death of white noise. And in this one we have something else. It's like a third peak. We have like a total Gen X statement on nihilistic postmodernism mixed with media. But it's rife with it. And I think that if anything, if I could sum this up in any way, if I could sum up Bret Easton Ellis, I don't think that his work needs to be summed up. I think that people should read his books. And I think that, a lot of generational stuff has come up recently because we're in the midst of the kind of turning point of the postmodern era, right? We're well past Big Nine. We're well past the war on terror. Now we're into something that seems to be turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer, right? We're turning into some other era now that's going past where we are. And I say that because of AI and because of like the NVIDIA stuff that just came out in quantum computing and techno death in the place that's going on right now, the two places. All of this stuff comes to a head, and I think that, generational things are sort of are we're starting to think about generations again in a way that hasn't been. I don't know if it hasn't been talked about in this way recently. There's just I don't know how to put my finger on it. There's just something else going on with this, and if there's one person that symbolizes Generation X, it would be Bret Easton Ellis in terms of art, movies, literature, the kind of cultural critique. I think that it would be Bret Easton Ellis. I think that would be your main way into seeing what that landscape sort of looks like. And one thing about the book, about the Shards, which is really crazy, is that unlike Lunar Park, which is full of the beautiful language, even if it's terrible language, beautiful beauty and terror, is that the Shards has not much of that. There, I've often talked about when you're reading a book, how if you can find specific words or phrases that are unique, that shine to you on the page or in your mind, in your memory, in your psyche, in your soul, then those are the things to take out of the book. And there's not much of that in this book, and I think that's purposeful. I don't think that's not a criticism of the way the book is written. I mean, it's 600 pages, and I think that that's purposeful. There's so much commonplace detail in the book that's different from Glamorama or from American Psycho or from any of us. Yeah, Glamorama was the other one that we did, by the way. Glamorama was the Monarch model assassins, which was a take on 90s fashion mixed with assassination and political intrigue that reminded me a lot of Don DeLeo. But, remember how Glamorama had like 200 pages of names of products, which is a very postmodern thing. It's like walking into the supermarket, right? The supermarket is the temple of postmodernism. And we see that in Don DeLeo. We see it especially in White Noise. And we get just the sort of lyricism. It ends up being a sort of poetic lyricism of names of products. In American Psycho, we get it, but in a different sense. It's set in the 80s, and they're more, even though Glamorama is specifically located in fashion, and a lot of the product names are fashion products. It's more like my sort of resonance with it is like walking along and looking at the aisles and looking at names, right? Whereas American Psycho is much more like embodied. We get more fashionable names and names associated with people, even though they are product names. And I think that this one doesn't have as much of that. This one is more, the names are more MTV related, band names, cultural names, and names of places in Los Angeles. And the reason for that is that Lunar Park the speaker is in his 40s, right? American Psycho, he's in his late 20s. Less Than Zero, he's in his early 20s. The Shards is not even a character who's a late teenager. It's looking at teenage life through the looking glass of somebody who is now in their 50s. So there's a difference here. There are like stations of translucent screens in front of us before we see the real thing. And that means that we can never sort of penetrate who the real person is. And I think that is partly a kind of satirical critique on the way we live our lives now, that people don't, here's what I got to say about this before I give you more words. Rereading Less Than Zero and reading the Shards really affect me. And I can't really put my finger on it. I don't know why, but they really get me in a dark place. And I think that's purposeful. I have a worldview that allows me to sort of hover over that and get out of that. But because I'm a sensitive, I'm a sensitive artist type, I suppose. I'm really affected by these books, and they really do. I think that I think that his writing succeeds in a way with me because there is so much uh, emotionless detachment, but I don't see it as emotionless detachment. I see it as the speaker recognizes that there are substantive things in the world and that he doesn't have the ability to grasp the emotional things because there's a mask that's been placed on him, and because what he sees all around him is tempting him away from that into the supermarket, right? And I feel bad for that character, and it makes me not nihilistic, but it makes me feel negative about the world in a way. And I don't mean negative about the world, but I mean it makes me it makes me Napoleon. It makes me brood. It makes me brood on these things, and it also makes me sort of unfortunately confront the fact that I think that there's a lot of this has always been the case, but especially now that there's a lot going on in the world right now where it's very difficult to rely on people, if that makes sense. And in the end, we rely on God and the strength that that we gain through faith and through our upbringing, and we just try to be those things for other people. But it is disconcerting. And that's not specific. It's just a generalized way that I'm sort of seeing the world. And I think that's yeah, sensitive artist gang. Yeah, and I think that's really unfortunate. And I don't know quite what to do about it. You know what I mean? There's not, and really, one of the things about this, about a sort of negative capability, is that there isn't much to do about it. But it's not even sad. It's kind of it's just kind of, it makes one sort of angry, I suppose. It just, am I making sense? Um, I think that it's just this. It's like I'm not really sure what to say about it. So let me go into some of the things that I found in the book though that are interesting. So first of all, the trawler is an interesting character because the trawler never appears and appears the entire book. And I sort of thought this might be, I was kind of reflecting on it today, and I thought maybe this is a pretty unique sort of wordplay because we do get mention in the book of the current day and of internet culture. It's not something I'm reading into it. I'm not putting this on the author, Bret Easton Ellis. But what I get from it is that the trawler is kind of a troll. We're being trolled. We're being trawled and we're being trolled. And by being trawled, it's like there's a net that drops into the water, the water of culture, the current, right? Jack Kerouac said, believe in the holy contour of life, right? Christ is the water of life. But there's also a water in terms of culture. We see this even in the water motif is important because even in classical literature, I just covered Goethe's Faust, and in Kit Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, or in Shakespeare, of course, we get this sort of water motif which echoes our heartbeat, which is a kind of iambic. It's an iambic rhythm, right? Unstressed, stress, down, up, down, up, down, up. It's like we have ups and downs in life, but in the flat landscape of Los Angeles, in the book, there are sort of contours within the geographical structure, and even in terms of the hierarchies through which he maneuvers. But there's a kind of flatness. Everything is always the same. It's kind of always the same, and that's one of the things that the character Bret wants to escape. He wants to leave L.A. and go off to college. I think it's in Less Than Zero. He mentions New Hampshire, even though I think it's Vermont where he went. But the trawler is this serial killer who is who is dropping a net into Los Angeles culture and kind of scooping up in his net all of the detritus. And the detritus for him is all of the loose ends. So we get animals that go missing. We get characters that seem to have been sort of discarded even by themselves or by their families, and they're swept up in this net, and then they are sacrificed and then rearranged. And this says, here's what it says about the, I'm going to read pages 12 and 13 where he first mentions the trawler. He says, let's see. For example, this became a time when homes in certain neighborhoods were suddenly being targeted and staked out by members of a cult whose purpose was hard to ascertain. The pale hippie hanging out at the end of the driveway, muttering to himself, his pacing interrupted by a brief shuffle dance. That's a very Charlie image. Hey, man, don't walk on the grass, man. The grass has feelings. When you put it under a microscope, you know you can see it smiling, man. And later in December, there were plastic explosives planted all over town by the cult the hippies belonged to. There was suddenly a sniper on the roof of a department store in Beverly Hills on the night before Thanksgiving, and there was a bomb threat that cleared out Chasen's on Christmas Eve. Suddenly, we knew about a teenage boy who had convinced himself he was possessed by a satanic demon in Pacific Palisades, and the elaborate exorcism by two priests to rid the boy of the demon, which almost killed him. The boy bled from the eyes and went deaf in one ear, developed pancreatitis, and 4 ribs were broken during the ritual. Suddenly, there was the UCLA student buried alive as a prank by 5 classmates high on PCP at a fraternity party that a witness blandly said had somehow gotten out of hand, and who almost didn't make it, and ending up in a coma in a darkened room in one of the buildings lining Medical Plaza. Suddenly, there were the spider infestations that bloomed everywhere across the city. The most fanciful story that fall involved a mutation, a monster, a fish the size of a small car hauled out of the ocean off Malibu. Its skin was gray-white, and there were large patches of silvery orange scales dusted across it. And even though it had the jaws of a shark, it decidedly wasn't one. And when the thing was gutted by local fishermen, they found the bodies of 2 dogs who had been missing swallowed whole. And then, of course, there was the trawler announcing itself. For about a year, there had been various break-ins and assaults and then disappearances. And in 1981, the corpse of a second missing teenage girl was found. The other one was discovered in 1980 and was ultimately connected to the home invasions. Everything might have happened without the presence of Robert Mallory, but the fact that his arrival coincided with the strange darkening that had begun to lightly spiral into our lives was something I couldn't ignore, even though others did, at their own peril. Whether it was bad luck or bad timing, these events were simply tied together. And even though Robert Mallory wasn't the sniper on the roof of Neiman Marcus or the caller who emptied out Chasen's, and he wasn't connected to the violent exorcism in Pacific Palisades or anywhere near the fraternity house in Westwood where the pledge had been flung into an open grave, his presence for me was connected to all these things. Every horror story we heard that fall, anything that darkened our bubble in ways we never noticed before, led to him. A week ago, I ordered a reproduction of the 1982 Buckley yearbook from a website called classmates.com for $99, and it was FedEx 4 days later to the apartment on Docking when it arrived. I remembered why I didn't have a copy. I never wanted to be reminded of the things that happened to me and the friends we lost. Our yearbook was called Images, and this edition was overseen by a classmate who became a well-known producer in Hollywood, and she gave a 1982 cinematic theme. Interspersed throughout the yearbook were stills of movies, which seemed in retrospect to what happened almost unnaturally frivolous and uncaring, a way of forcing a lipstick smile onto a death mask. While slowly turning the pages of the senior section, which each of us had an individual page to reminisce and thank our parents and add photos of friends and quotations, designing the page to represent who we thought we were at 18, our best selves, I was haunted by the fact that out of the 60 seniors from the class of 1982, 5 were missing. The 5 who didn't make it for various reasons, and this fact was simply inescapable. I couldn't dream it away or pretend it wasn't true. We were listed alphabetically, and after sipping from a tumbler of gin, I would tentatively turn to where each of them would have been placed within these 60 pages and notice that they simply weren't there. They had all existed that first week in September, but now they were erased. Instead, 3 of them were listed in the in memoriam section at the end of the book. I I resonate with that a lot. And I think it's because this is the way that literature works. Literature is reading is a whetstone that sharpens the mind of the intellect, right? And I think that this resonates with me a lot because oftentimes reading provides a synchronistic way of looking at the universe because for me, it works through words. I will notice a word or a phrase that I hadn't seen in a long time or ever, a unique word. In this one, it's the phrases and even the way that the speaker tells the story here, that he's showing us exactly what he bought. He's interspersing his current mind, which is older, looking back at his high school years, looking at them in reflection, and noticing a few different motifs here: masks, disappearances, erasure. And all this resonates with me because, I guess because I'm about to have my reunion, for school. I went to a prep school very similar to the school that he goes to. And prep schools have a kind of a way of being that a behavior, a type of behavior that's embodied in the language that he uses even to talk about people or situations that is unique to prep school. And I can't really explain what it is, but it's a kind of, it's not a cultural critique. It's not a sense of like superiority. It's not something stupid or light or that's easily put into verbiage. It's some sort of attitude. And this makes me reminiscent and also melancholy and also relate to the speaker at this point in the book. Because I think that we all find that as we get older, we if you're looking back at a page, for instance, like a yearbook, and you look at the people who are gone, there's this mechanism that I have, you may have this, where I'm blessed with an unusual memory, and I feel like my whole life is just yesterday. I feel like not only do I see the images and the things that happened, like as if I'm watching a movie, but also I can smell the things. I can see, I can hear the music. I can feel like in my bones what it was like in that moment. And, I just had a friend pass away. And it's crazy because, I had this, this thought last night in the middle of the night. I woke up and I thought I'd just been on, this is crazy. I'm going to share this with you, but I thought that I had just been on the phone with him, and I remembered a conversation that I had, when I was in 10th grade, and I called him on the phone, and he was at a friend's house, and and he was watching the Beatles' Yellow Submarine movie, and he said he was on mescaline, and he was describing the movie to me, and I remember exactly what I thought. I remember exactly where I was. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember exactly where I imagined him sitting and what the house looked like on the outside. It was on this, I would give you the street, what it looked like outside, what the way the grass looked, and it was right there. And he was just fucking right there, man. It was right there. That just happened to me. But it wasn't. It was like 27 years ago. And I think that's what great, I think that's one thing that great literature does, is that it makes you like relive it, a time that you lived as if it's now, as if it just happened and if it's now. But the crazy thing about this book is that I think I realized in that part, reading this, and this is right before the fall of 1980, but this is the prologue to the book. I realized that this character was going to be the trawler. I don't know how, but I think it's because his something about noticing the way that the people disappeared. I thought it wouldn't be as easy as it seemed, and that that the mask was a mask that had been placed on him that he couldn't get off. So first of all, the speaker has to be aware that the way that he sees things is not the way that other people see things in a book, right? Or in the reality of the book. And that there's some sort of, not blinders, but there's a mask that's been placed on him. Not by society, but by a number of factors, and that it's impossible to get rid of this mask, and that he wants to reveal who he truly is, and that's part of the whole Skittles thing in the book. That which I find to be like for shock as a kind of fake confession in the book or something. I just sort of, it's important in the book, but it's also seems to be a fake surface level that has depth to it that the speaker actually doesn't care about. So I just kind of disregard all that. What I really regard in this is the fact that there's no one that he seems to be able to latch onto, even himself. And that's why consistently throughout the book, the character is drugging himself to sleep. He's going into these sort of fogs. Every time he talks to another character, the character says, "Oh, is it time we get the real Bret? There's our old Bret. We get the real Bret back." Like as if he hasn't been there at all, right? And this is also, this is reminiscent of American Psycho. It's reminiscent of Lunar Park, where the character, the speaker, sort of materializes things. The mask. And it's not as simple as DID, even though that's not simple. It's something that sort of eludes us, a kind of general malaise, a loathing. The mask appears on page 112 here. He says, this is interesting. He says, "Didn't want to interrupt their conversation," I said, trying to act casual. "It seemed like you guys were really into it, having a deep talk about something. The three faces suddenly appeared, lured by me, and I saw the manic cycling behind Robert's eyes. There was the mask, and then there was the dangerously ill person behind the mask that we didn't know about yet, and then there was the face that was looking at the scene from a wide angle, a master shot, trying to figure out what would calm this nervous and inquisitive boy standing in front of him." And then later on, when he's talking to him, he says on page 113D, he says, "Robert wasn't ready to say goodbye yet. He was staring at me, trying to understand the individual in front of him. Was I a friend? Was I an enemy? Could I be trusted? Would he have to play games with me? What was my story exactly? He wasn't offended or angry, just curious. I made a motion with my hands. Is there something else? I just figured something out about you," he said, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I just figured something out about you, Bret." I tried to smile. "Yeah, what did you figure out?" He paused for emphasis. "When you talk to me, you're really talking to yourself, dude," he murmured, and then quickly smiled as if it was a casual and natural observation, even though it was clearly meant to unmoor me. It was a tease, but I laughed politely because I had nothing left to say. Confused, I immediately walked away from him and thought I was going to pass out from hunger, and went straight to McDonald's on the second floor of the mall and ordered a Big Mac and large fries and ate them ravenously while sitting alone. When I headed out of the Galleria about 15 minutes later, I saw Robert Mallory in the deserted mall, just a lone figure with a blank expression. A boy in a private school uniform standing in front of a particular storefront on the first floor and staring intently into the glass windows. It was the mall's pet shop called Vince's Pets. And then he thinks about it again. When you're talking to me, you're really talking to yourself, dude. And what he realizes, and what you realize, what I realized reading the book and what you would realize, is that is exactly the case. And this is miraged by the fact that Bret is following Mallory around town and is trying to figure out if he is the trawler. Because when he sees him looking in the mirrored sort of windows of the pet store, it's because in our mind he's planting the seed that he's looking for another pet because the pets go missing before the victim dies. But really, this could just be a guy who's new to school, who has the same problems that he does, and who is alone and who's looking at himself in the glass and looking beyond. Whenever characters look in literature, again, whenever characters look into a window of a store or look beyond, like they are looking both at themselves and at something beyond. They're looking at through the windows of the house. We saw this in Wuthering Heights. Remember, we saw this with when Kathy appears to Heathcliff in the window of the mansion, and he's looking at himself, looking beyond. This is constantly in literature, except for here, instead of the house, which, by the way, seems to be all windows, right? It's all glass. Like, they're always on display. And the fish that occur in the book are because they're living in a kind of fishbowl, right? Everyone can see from the outside, but the characters can sort of see from inside out. But they've got this glass in front of them that reflects on them, that sort of shields their vision. And we realize that that's probably true about him looking at himself, because it turns out, like, so later Bret gets an anonymous tape left in his mailbox at home, and he listens to it, and he realizes it's a tape of the trawler who's just doing that psychotic, like, heavy breathing in the phone, right? And then sort of not talking, not saying anything, just breathing, which is, endemic of, stalking, gang stalking. And he doesn't turn it in to any of the authorities, and he realizes, and he says this later on in the book, that the reason he doesn't turn it into the authorities is because he realizes they're going to assume that he made it himself. So, like, one of the characters, Matt, gets a poster left in his mailbox anonymously, and it's like an Elvis Costello poster. And then there's one that gets like a Journey poster, and they go in sequence. So there's like a poster for a band, and it has 1 and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and that precedes the victims. The 5 also points to the 5 points of the pentagram, and later we notice that, like, furniture is slightly rearranged in the house, and that there's a pentagram in a death mark, right, that you've been marked in the corner of the poster. But none of the characters care. They don't care. They're like, somebody left me a poster. I don't know. Because all their families are in entertainment, and all their friends are constantly leaving them something. It would be like as if you got an Instagram DM from your friend or something. It's just they don't pay any attention to it. There's nothing to grasp onto here. And he realizes that that they'll probably think it's him. And in the end, you realize reading it that it probably is him, and he doesn't even know it. And it's not as simple as a dissociation. It's a kind of a meta dissociation in this book, which I think is really clever. I think that the reviews of the book some of the poor reviews of the book don't really understand the work, which often happen. I mean, that often happens, right? If you read a blurb review of this book, it's probably by somebody who didn't read the book or read a section of the book or who got it from someone else. But I think there's a lot of depth here, a lot of depth in the, seeming surface, which is, if you've read any Bret Easton Ellis, it's always like that. Here's about the Riders of the Afterlife. This says, that week this is chapter 8, page 167. That week I'd been reading an article about the cult in the Los Angeles Times, a group of young, barely articulate hippies formed out of the Mojave, acolyte of a leader only referred to as Bruce, who turned out to be a high school English teacher from Lancaster. And it would normally have sounded absurd and been dismissed as junior level Manson stuff, But their persistence in making themselves known and visible in LA was becoming slightly chilling in its aggressiveness. Many of them had been arrested for trespassing, climbing over a gate to the backyard if no one answered the front entrance. Or if the bell, the hippie eagerly pressed, was ignored, they'd walk around the property, peering through the windows, and then try the sliding glass doors, banging on them until someone appeared in the kitchen and called the police. Sometimes they were found in someone's pool or on a chaise longue in Hancock Park or Silver Lake, tripping on acid, wreaths of leaves garlanded as crowns around their heads, or sometimes they were hiding in the garage, wedged into a trash can. And few of them were involved in physical altercations with people exiting grocery stores and movie theaters, restaurants and parking lots, demanding money, parading anyone who wasn't willing to offer a few dollars. I remember there were 3 or 4 photos of various cult members in the Los Angeles Times article, and they looked slightly cleaner than members of the Manson family and so young and harmless. But maybe Los Angeles became more invested in this cult because of how wounded it had been by the Tate LaBianca murders and the damage inflicted on the psyche of the city. And there was the same general ragtag scruffiness, the dead-eyed youth, the kind of psychotic apathy behind whatever brainwashed mission they conjured up. It was vague, unify, bring together, utopia, ease pain, destroy status quo, the same tired slogans, which is interesting because in one sentence, he basically gave the whole process MO of the various cults in LA. I think that's pretty interesting. They also believed in aliens who could heal them, and they were enthralled with peyote and love is everything, everything is nothing. This was the first time I'd read about the cult. Self-named Riders of the Afterlife. Riders of the Storm, right? Riders on the Storm. And they'd been encountered with Beechwood Canyon all the way to... How do you say that? Somebody from L.A. How do you pronounce this? O-J-A-I. I'm not an L.A. person. I don't know. How do you pronounce the name of that? Somebody put it in phonetics in the chat for me. O-J-A-I. How do you say that? I'm not going to mispronounce it and sound like an uncool L.A. person. I don't give a shit. Just tell me how do you pronounce it. But I'd never heard of them before. And in that same issue of the Los Angeles Times, there was a report of another home invasion last Monday night in Woodland Hills. It was the familiar narrative: phone calls in the preceding week, furniture rearranged, a dog in the neighborhood missing for a few days. The victim was assaulted by a figure in a black ski mask. The victim was tied to a chair and knocked unconscious. A pattern was completed. The victim unaware that they'd found themselves in a pattern, and otherwise they would have gone to the police earlier. And for a moment, I began to connect the home invasions with the cult. I remember putting the paper down, and on that Thursday night, going back to my novel, distracted and worried about the Riders of the Afterlife and wondering if they were responsible for the break-ins and the disappearances that were haunting the city instead of just a lone intruder. Maybe it was the eeriness of the article about the cult that activated my imagination that night, because I kept thinking I heard someone in the house. I was at my desk working on the novel, and whenever I stopped typing, I would suddenly sit very still, positive that a presence either was lurking outside the house or was actually somewhere within it, which all occurs in Lunar Park. Is it Ojai? That's how you pronounce it. Ojai, Mark. Is that how you pronounce it? Oh, hi. What's the norm joke about Hancock Park? Pistol whipped in Hancock Park. Is it Hancock Park? Yeah, Matt. So what happens to Matt, who Bret is having a Skittles relationship with, is that Matt disappears for a week, and then it ends up that they find a bloody backpack miles away, and then they find his body floating in the pool, and the cat that they own has been decapitated, and its eyes gouged out, and its tongue pulled down and nailed to a wall beside him. And this all occurs after the poster that he received that had the pentagram on it. He didn't even care, and they rule it an OD, because they said he OD'd on psychedelics, grass, and I don't know, Quaaludes or something like that. And then they say, no, it was a suicide, because then they release the photos of him, and he's got slash marks all over him and bruises. And nobody seems to care, and he goes back to school, and people are making jokes about it. And this also is interesting because was this Bret who did this? Right? In his dark fugue with his dark passenger, is he the person who has been perpetrating these things and is lying to us, the reader, about it? So in other words, like in American Psycho, this confession has meant nothing. I think this is an interesting book because usually we get the resolution of where we have the killer is lying to us, telling the story, and we find out it's them. This happens in not a murder is announced. The Mousetrap, Agatha Christie. It happens in Identity, right, where the John Cusack character has the ID, right? Spoilers for that movie. But this is totally different because in this, we get what we get here, and this is pretty clever, is that the speaker has been giving us not even a confession, a story about all of these things that happen. And there's a series of murders, and there's a series of riders of the afterlife. He goes into a club at one point. It's kind of a funny scene. Like, he goes to this club. He goes into the bathroom. He realizes he's not alone in the bathroom. The bathroom's kind of like gothy, and he's like, why are the mirrors so dark even in the bathroom? It doesn't make sense. He looks, he hears like a scratching, and then he sees like this Charlie hippie in the corner with a candle doing speaking in tongues, and the hippie gets up and like tries to slash at him with a dirty fingernail, goes into the club, slashes the girl across her forehead with his dirty fingernail. The bouncer grabs this hippie and throws him out, and they're like, she doesn't need to go to the hospital, it's fine. So it's like, this is just a fact of daily life with him, and nobody even cares about that. So is this the killer telling us a story of the things that happen and then not even revealing it to us? Are we being lied to throughout the entire narrative? I think it's pretty clever. And I think he is lying to us. I think that's also a statement on the fact that people assume that the book is a confession or some sort of memoir of Bret Easton Ellis growing up in early Los Angeles, when all of his books are kind of like that. But what he's actually showing us is that, no, there's still, even in the memoir, I'm lying to you, and even in the narrative of the fake memoir, I'm lying to you. Which is pretty clever, I think. It's also, obviously, a critique of the fact that that there's nothing more that I detest than the stench of lies, right? Just lies everywhere, lies from people in very commonplace situations, which equate to lies in big situations. He starts to have a kind of a mantra to himself where he says, you hear things that aren't there, and that's covered by the fact that rub some coke in it, kid says. Yeah, probably. That's probably what they did. That's pretty good. That one got me. That was good. That one was good. I give you one for that one. Well done, kid. That was good. That's probably exactly what they did. I don't know why I thought that was so funny. That's probably what the bouncer said. Oh my God. You can see the vein popping in my forehead from laughing at that. Yeah, no, that was good. That was good. Yeah, so you hear things that aren't there is covered by the fact that, he wants to be a writer and that he's sensitive and he's writing this book. He says on page 282, there's a lot about being watched, being drawn to locations. The word zombie I wrote down. He quotes Ezra Pound randomly on page 362, paddles on a wet black bow. It's kind of almost like functions as a programming phrase there, a code phrase. And then also on page 372 and 373, there's an entire summary of Robert Mallory, and this is where character Tom finally figures out who Robert is. And he says, sometimes I think I'm dealing with one person, and then I feel like I'm dealing with an actor. So this is something that I think is covered in this book that's not really covered in the other books, and that's the idea of the actor. It would make sense if we're talking about Hollywood continuously and L.A. that we would focus more on the role-playing aspect of characters within his narratives, but we don't really ever get that, which is something that I think is noticeably absent, purposefully. But here, he does that as if the character is method acting, as if the character that we're reading in the first person is method acting a role that he doesn't even know he's acting, or that he's aware and that he wants to show us that he is unaware of it, which is like triple layers of meta. But now that he's got Tom thinking that, or now that Tom thinks that, we have a kind of cover for the speaker here. Here's what he says about. This is what it says about the trawler. Okay, so this is page. I'm going to read this section, page 380 to 381. So Bret has been collecting newspaper clippings of various murders that occur in L.A., and this can be covered by the fact, or substantiated by the fact, that he's a writer writing a book, and that he's a teenager. His parents aren't even there. And this is something probably all of us do in Seaspiracy world of various things, but here it's slightly different. But here's what he does. He takes note of some of the language that he gets in these articles, and this is exactly what I would do. He says, my eyes shot up to the first paragraph of the article, and I barely breathed when I turned to the Metro section, where it continued, blasted across an entire page with photos of where the girls' bodies were found, as well as excerpts from the letter. Some of it typed and redacted, some of it scrawled in different color pens, which is a kind of throwback to Zodiac or to Son of Sam, right? Program to Kill, which detailed a day only last week where I and my friends, quote, spent the afternoon wandering through an abandoned mill looking for, quote, the appropriate dumping ground, and then stealing another dog last night from a neighborhood where an upcoming target was located. Quote, the sacrifice is how the trawler referred to the target, who would ultimately be left to, quote, the god. And this is Robert Mallory. This clearly seems to me to be a reference to Robert Mallory, as if the character and his friends are unknowing members of this cult, and the god to whom they're sacrificing is the Robert Mallory cult that Bret is obsessed with. The article was a jagged piece of insanity, and I had no idea why the Los Angeles Times was quoting so liberally from this madman's letter. It was repellent, ghastly, and yet I inhaled it like I was starving because it confirmed something for me, and I located the hideous truth being expressed. The secret madness of the world was revealed. And it was admittedly fascinating to read details that clarified this monster's life and try to uncover what the motive might have been. The article quoted how he and, quote, his friends lived in motels and moved across the city by night, following the moon, hitting on certain neighborhoods, which is kind of Lunar Park, looking for houses with the easiest access, or perhaps finding out where potential victims they'd already targeted resided, and then trafficking them to judge which ones were suitable for, quote, sacrifice and which ones were not, the ones they would be able to leave for, quote, the god. The letter detailed how the trawler and his, quote, friends watched young women jog alone on empty streets through a pair of binoculars, and maybe they shuffled after them through a mall's food court, or were waiting for them in a public parking lot by the beach, hoping to find a target who was appropriate for the god. The bodies were referred to as paradises that were needed in order to show off the alterations, and the trawler confirmed that he had been altering for years before he arrived in Los Angeles, and this city was just the next step in the continuum. Oh, God. And then there were, I'm going to kind of skip through this one, alterations, buckets of bleach, dull hacksaw. What were the Polaroids of? And confused my mind to answer these questions in the most gruesome ways. There were the, quote, lonely spaces between the murders where the bloodlust washed toward him, and that's when the home invasions would begin again, and what the trawler called the rearrangements, which were actually tests to see how viable the targets were, if they were suitable for sacrifice and the god. There was the admission that he'd never sacrificed a target he had physically attacked. Those were two separate things, and that so much of his time was spent waiting, and that following people was what kept him in control, and the rituals were part of the repeating narrative that was highly structured. The driving around, the selection of a particular neighborhood, the selection of the house based on the selection of the teenager who resided there, usually a girl, the stalking of the residents, the search for animals. This narrative, the trawler admitted, aided in quelling his paranoia. He was distracted from, quote, the pain with, quote, the project. The screaming of the victims, which the trawler says he recorded, was the climax of, quote, ultimate annihilation. So, what he did there was pretty seamlessly include his clippings and quotes from newspaper articles into his discovery and dissection, I can't think of any other word, of what the crime scenes and what the trawlers and the trawlers' MO. And I think it's important because people with a discerning mind or with a kind of detective mind or people that look for clues in language will often do the same sort of thing. I mean, we do the same sort of thing looking for NLP or for, when you're deconstructing poems or any sort of analysis. But what I realized here was that this is the seamless sewing together of the speaker's MO and his unconscious, conscious mind and his own purpose in what he's doing. Because all the things described here are basically what Bret has been doing throughout the book. He's followed Robert Mallory. He found the clippings of the backpack. He found the posters. He found the tape. He goes to talk to Matt's dad about what happened. And there's a suspicious mentality that occurs when he goes to talk to the family. He realizes that the dad says, no, he couldn't have driven. He was missing from school for a week. He couldn't have actually driven around town for a week because then I noticed, he says, this is The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. I noticed the odometer because I had the car taken in before that. And then when he was killed, I looked at the odometer of the car and it had only been 10 miles. So Bret notices that there's a condo in Century City, which is just over the hill, which is where he follows Robert Mallory. He sneaks into Robert Mallory's apartment house. He rearranges details. He finds clues. He finds a phone number. He finds a key. He goes into the house. He breaks into the house. He goes down into the basement. He notices something dark. It's like all the stuff that he's doing trailing him is stuff that he's actually doing trailing himself. So it's pretty interesting. And then I even wrote down, so just to mirror what happens in the book in terms of his writing down the things, I actually did it in terms of the notes here. I wrote down continuum, alterations, bodies equal paradises, following the moon, blood equals the arousal, the remakings, assemblage, between murders equals, quote, lonely spaces, sacrifice, test, ultimate annihilation. And then anyway, in the end, he ends up in a vicodin haze after the assemblage and the description of the way that the character is found, which I'm not going to read here. It's pretty gross. But they're basically rearranged and cut up and sewn together. And it reminded me of that sculpture that I brought up a number of times called Kiss of Death. I wrote a poem about it. Saw it at the Guggenheim in 2005 by the YBA's Young British artists Tim Noble and Sue Webster. It's called Kiss of Death. And it reminded me of that. An assemblage, which is assembling a personality or a character because of his own lost persona behind this mask. And that's essentially the book. And yeah, that's pretty much the book. I asked Tom if he wanted to meet me for dinner that night. He was staying at the Ritz-Carlton. Tom politely backed off, said he had plans. I gave him a number in New York, but he didn't call me, and I never saw him again. That's it. That's the book. That's The Shards. So that's Bret Easton Ellis' The Shards, his latest book. It's about 600-page new novel, came out 2023. And I didn't mark in this book because I got a signed copy. So I didn't mark in it. I just put the notes in it. But that's it for that one. So next book is Less Than Zero. And this is Bret Easton Ellis' first book. So he did Less Than Zero, Rules of Attraction, American Psycho, let's see, Glamorama, Lunar Park, Imperial Bedrooms, The Shards, and I've covered all those except Imperial Bedrooms. I didn't cover Rules of Attraction. I've read Rules of Attraction. I've seen the film a bunch of times. I probably won't cover that one. And I wasn't even going to cover Less Than Zero because this is the second or third time I've read this book. And it really is the darkest of his books. Okay, so what happened was in his actual life, Bret Easton Ellis wrote this book and got an advance for it and published it while he was still in college. and that sort of catapulted him into the Brat Pack literati. And then they made the movie of it, of course, with Andrew McCarthy, Robert Downey Jr., James Spader, Jamie Gertz. A bunch of people are in the movie, and it was a pretty big hit. And it's one of those Gen X cultural signposts of the 1980s and then later the 1990s. And the reason I don't like this book is because I get it. I get what it's saying and what it's doing, and it's disparate and sort of cut up, not in a William Burroughs method, but it's a pretty cut up book, and that's because it's doing exactly what I was describing about the Shards and about his other works, which is there's a kind of incomplete narrative structure in this. It's sort of inchoate, and that's because he is showing us, the reader, in his first book, that life especially in the 80s and for the privileged classes of Los Angeles is empty and meaningless, but not in the way that we normally think. Okay, so usually we think about these things in a sort of nihilistic, there's nothing matters way, and he never really says that. It's really from what the speaker does not say. And we sort of grasp that the main character in this, whose name is Clay, the speaker's name is Clay, is empty and yet wants to be made full. He wants to be made whole and full, but because of his alienation from his family and the superfluous nature of his friendships with people and his exterior locus, I mean, he's got nothing. And it's incredibly sad, but the reason I really don't like this book is because it has two scenes in particular that are so incredibly dark and so disturbing. And I'm not going to relate what they are. One of them involves they're both sort of creeper scenes, and one is an 8mm scene, which is so fucking dark, and that I think that the way that he reacts to the scenes in this is that it doesn't matter whether the things are factual. It doesn't matter whether, like, the real Bret Easton Ellis as a person experienced these things. That's not the point. The point is that there's a truth in them, the fact that they do happen, and that the character would even know that they happened, and the fact that we know that they happen, and there's nothing that he does about it, or really, he probably could do something about it, but there's nothing that he does about it, and it doesn't phase, it phases him, but in a sense where it's unspoken in the book. And the point is that, all right, here's the point. So, if you're, and this makes sense to me, if you're going to have a book about ultimate annihilation, as he says in the Shards, and you're going to have a landscape of literature and culture where nothing matters and where characters have no value, then it makes sense that you would push to the ultimate devaluing and the ultimate degradation to show that the characters are completely obliterated. They are like pieces of plastic floating on top of a swimming pool in L.A. while fires rage around the Century City condo. It's just inferno. And I think that's why he includes it in this. And that is shocking, of course, and it's really hard to read. It's really hard, really disgusting and hard to read. But I get why he includes it in the book, because it really does shock you. And I think maybe one of the points is that if you read this and you're not shocked, then it shows that you are one of the characters in the book. And maybe that's the dividing line. Maybe the dividing line here is that the characters that Clay meets when he's home from college and he's with his girlfriend, and he's talking. Julian, the character Julian, is the Robert Downey Jr. character in the film. The film is a lot different from the movie, so I'm not really talking about the film because it attempts to sort of coalesce the narrative, and that sort of that belies the point of the novel, is that there is no coalescing. It's all disparate. Everything is shattered. It's supposed to be it's supposed to give you a kind of vertigo, and so I think that when the character comes home, when Clay comes home from college and he's with all these people and he's hanging out, they're all doing drugs. It's 1980s. They're all on coke. They're all on Nembutals. They're all on ludes. They're all, he's constantly drinking Greyhounds, which is a sign of his, Skittles. And you have this character Julian, and they're a constant, sort of present day flashbacks to the way Julian was when they were kids. He sees Julian riding his bike. They're kids. Julian's riding his bike. They're both kids. They're innocent, and yet then he sees him, and Julian has become a cocaine and heroin dealer in L.A. and gets in with some pretty nasty people. He takes a loan from them. He can't pay it back, and the only way he can pay it back is to be rented out. And he goes to his friend Clay for money, and he says, "Why are you even giving me this money?" And Clay says, "Because you're my friend, right?" And he says, "Oh, yeah, right. So Julian has been so degraded and degenerated that it doesn't even register with him what friends are at this point. Clay at least still has that. And Clay is trying to come to terms in these specific sections in the book in italics. In the italicized sections of the book, he's trying to come to terms with the reader and with himself in the fact that this is his life and this is culture, this is the world we live in now, and that there's nothing for him to grasp onto. And what's he going to go back to? He just has nothing. There's nothing that anybody in his world can give him except for what he has a little bit left of, which is service. And even that sort of gets obliterated in his face. It's really quite, Disappear Here is one of the recurring choruses within the book. Disappear here. He just wants to disappear. Also the motif of coyotes, which I liken more to actually just going even further into jackals. It's like you got to beware of the coyotes in L.A. and the Hollywood Hills and on Mulholland where he lives, because they're stealing people's pets. And he sees a coyote going across the road one day, and it's got a blood red bandage in its mouth, and he realizes it's someone's cat. And it registers enough for him to state the fact that it happened, but he doesn't have to tell us what it means to him, because we can sort of see that through him showing us the image in the first place. But I would go further into saying that it's like a metaphorical jackal, because all the people around him are jackals. They just consume each other. And the epigraphs are, this is the game that moves as you play by X, and there's a feeling I get when I look to the west by Led Zeppelin. Starts off with a very famous opening, which is, people are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. This is the first thing I hear when I come back to the city. Blair picks me up from LAX and mutters this under her breath as her car drives up the on-ramp. She says, people are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. Though that sentence shouldn't bother me, it stays in my mind for an uncomfortably long time. Nothing else seems to matter. Not the fact that I'm 18 and it's December and the ride on the plane had been rough and the couple from Santa Barbara who were sitting across from me in first class had gotten pretty drunk. Not the mud that had splattered the legs of my jeans, which felt kind of cold and loose earlier that day at an airport in New Hampshire. Not the stain on the arm of the wrinkled, damp shirt I wear, a shirt which had looked fresh and clean this morning. Not the tear on the neck of my gray Argyle vest, which seems vaguely more Eastern than before, especially next to Blair's clean, tight jeans and her pale blue t-shirt. All of this seems irrelevant next to that one sentence. It seems easier to hear that people are afraid to merge rather than, I'm pretty sure Muriel is anorexic, or the singer on the radio crying out about magnetic waves. Nothing else seems to matter to me but those 10 words. Not the warm winds, which seem to propel the car down the empty asphalt freeway, or the faded smell of marijuana, which still faintly permeates Blair's car. All it comes down to is that I'm a boy coming home for a month and meeting someone whom I haven't seen for 4 months, and people are afraid to merge. Yeah, it's interesting that, that what he's saying here, essentially, not to dissect it too much because it seems pretty obvious, but what he seems to be saying here is that the LA freeway system is built around people and people moving from one place to another, the interconnectedness of people. And yet, like in Point Break, people are just moving around in their metal coffins, man. And that even on the roads where people should merge and their lives should intertwine. They should leave a resonance with each other. They should connect with one another. They should be on each other's plane on the same level. They should talk to one another. Right? They should glean something from one another. They should share. They should serve. All the things that human beings do in our sandbox. Right? I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean in the pattern of the way that people move. I'm not comparing people to insects or something. The way that people move, that there is this alienation, and part of the alienation is the West on the verge of the Pacific abyss. There's your word. There's the Hollywood fishbowl aspect of it, and there's the fact that they live in a cultural degradation, which is very similar to now. I guess it never sort of goes away, but yeah, disappear here occurs on page 38, 39. I'm going to read you a little passage which I really like. This is why I like Bret Easton Ellis. It's a small passage, but this is why I really like his writing. He says, we leave Chasen's and the streets are empty, page 67, and the air's still dry and hot and the wind's still blowing. On Little Santa Monica, a car lays overturned, its windows broken, and as we pass it, my sisters crane their necks to get a closer look, and they ask my mother, who's driving, to slow down, and she doesn't. My sisters complain. We drive to Jimmy's, and my mother brings the Mercedes to a stop, and we get out, and the valet takes it all. And we sit on a couch next to a small table in the darkened bar area. Jimmy's is pretty empty, except for a few scattered couples at the bar and another family that sits across from us. There's nobody in the bar. A piano player singing September Song, and he sings softly. My father complains that he should be playing Christmas carols. My sisters go to the restroom, and when they come back, they tell us they saw a lizard in one of the stalls, and my mother says she doesn't get it. I start to flirt with the oldest girl from the family across from us, and I wonder if our family looks like this one does. The girl looks a lot like a girl I was seeing for a little while in New Hampshire. She has short blonde hair and blue eyes and a tan, and when she notices me staring at her, she looks away, smiling. I love that passage. I love that passage because this is a combination of the best of what we get from both two sort of opposite ends of a 20th century spectrum. We get both Jack Kerouac and Ernest Hemingway in this. We get showing and not telling. We get a play-by-play of events as if we're watching a sports game. We get the characters showing us all of these things that at least I can relate to, but without telling us what his feelings are. I mean, and the point that the fact that it culminates in he's sitting at this table with his family. It's Christmas time, and this is nothing like my family, but that he's in L.A. and that they aren't talking to they aren't talking to each other. They aren't relating to one another, and he doesn't have to tell us that. But then I found this very relatable. He looks over, and there's a girl his age, and she's at a table with her family, and she smiles at him. As she turns, like she looks at him, makes eye contact, sees that he's looking at her, and she turns and smiles. And the fact that logically, we shouldn't be able to see that she's smiling if she has her head turned. But we know that she's smiling. And that's all that he needs to register that there's some sort of connection here. And I found that I found that one detail in the book probably the most promising thing in the book. I found it incredibly visceral and relatable and beautiful because it's like that thing that they say about when you're young. I haven't been to an airport in a while, so I don't know if this happens, but when you're young, when I was young and I flew all the time, especially international flights, if I was at an airport and I was 22 years old and there was a girl there who was my age, it was like you're the only two people in the world. I can't think of a time where I didn't see a girl my age, college girl, and I was in college, and that we didn't talk to each other. And it wasn't, it's that, when you get on the plane and you don't want the person on the plane sitting next to you to talk to you, right? Because, especially if it's like they're going to talk the whole time. That's happened to me before, but it's like, but when I was on a plane, and I remember this specifically happened, I was on a bus. I was walking in England. It was the first time I went to England. I was walking down from somewhere on the East Coast. I was taking a bus from like Nottingham to somewhere. And I was on this bus, and I was alone in my seat, and I turned and I looked, and there was a blonde girl my age, and she was like diagonal to me, and I just glanced at her once and then turned around. And my thought was, I don't want to be the annoying guy that goes up and talks, and then, she feels like she has to talk to me the whole time, because that'd be, because nobody wants to be that. But she got up and walked to the front, and then as she was coming back, looked at me, and then I was like reading a book, and she said something to me about the book, and then we talked for a minute, and then she sat down next to me on the bus, and then she asked me where I was staying. I told her I was staying at a hostel somewhere. We got to. She gave me her number. She was from Colchester, and we got to the train station, and she and her dad and her sister gave me a ride to the hostel. And then that night I met her, and we went to the disco that night. So it's like I relate to that. I relate to the unexpected psychic meeting of age that you come across. I mean, now I'm 43, so if I went to an airport to see a 43, I'd just probably have my head buried in a book the whole time. But if I saw another woman my age 43 there, well, first of all, I should probably be whatever. But what I'm saying is, there are a lot of things that you do when I suppose old people do that, right? I mean, you see like some 80-year-old man and his wife has passed away. He's in an airport and he sees another 80-year-old woman and they have a connection and they start talking. I suppose that happens. It's just a beautiful thing that I found from the book. Pages 75, 78, werewolf. So what happens? I already told you the plot of the book. And basically that's the plot, that Clay goes back from the East Coast. He goes back home to L.A. He goes to see his family. His family's sort of alienated from it. At least he's with his family, though. He's with his friends. He lends his friend Julian some money. He goes to where Julian is having this awful thing, and then he gets out of it. He kind of helps him escape, and then and that's it. That's pretty much it. And then he leaves and he goes back home. But it's kind of not a pastiche, a Bildungsroman, I suppose, even though he's already gone through it enough so we know what's happening at the time. It's a sort of post-Bildungsroman story. I said, let's see. Yeah, page 75 to 78, werewolves driving through the desert, car fires, newspaper clippings of murders. There's the Doors songs that they're listening to, which is kind of context for the Shards. Also, this is related to Jim Morrison. He must have some sort of resonance with Jim Morrison's story. I mean, he's in L.A. because Jim Morrison's story was, of course, that he was a kid. He was driving through the New Mexico desert in his car with Admiral Morrison, right? Driving through the New Mexico desert, and they saw a car crash, and he saw the body of a dead Indian lying on the side of the road, and he said that in the ghost dance that soul of the Indian just flew up and kind of floated into his soul, right? Which is poetical and partly 60s and psychedelic. Who knows? Maybe true. But there's certainly a motif that informs the rest of Jim Morrison's poems and songs that kind of leads to this. And then also we have the fact that everybody in the novel is degrading in terms of their life experience. They start off all doing, they're smoking that bubonic chronic, and then they're taking Valiums, and then they're shooting smack, and they're doing coke, and then they're freebasing, and then there's somebody doing meth, and then it degrades into the ultimate sort of, it goes past the drugs is one thing, but the other stuff is completely different. But it's sort of a gradual degradation in this. Let's see what else here. Hand through the glass. Character puts his hand through the glass and gets cut up, just like in the Shards. American Psycho. This is real L.A. postmodernism. No names. That's what I said on page 144. He says, this is one of those sections in italics. He says, oh yeah. So this is the no name section. The window we're sitting next to is open, and I lift a glass of champagne in my mouth and close my eyes and let my hair get slightly ruffled by the hot winds. And then I turn my head and look up toward the hills. A businessman stops by. I asked my mother to come, but she said that she was busy. She was lying out by the pool reading Glamour magazine, and when I asked her to come, just for drinks, I said, I don't want to go to Trump's just for drinks. I sighed, said nothing. I don't want to go anywhere. One of my sisters was lying next to her, shrugged and put on her glasses. Anyway, I'm having on put on the cable, she said, O-N, as I left the pool. The businessman leaves. My father doesn't say much. I try to make conversation. I tell him about the coyote that Blair ran over. He tells me that it's too bad. He keeps looking out the window, eyeing the first fire hydrant red Ferrari. My father asked me if I'm looking forward to going back to New Hampshire, and I look at him and tell him yes. I awoke to the sound of voices outside. The director, whose party my parents had taken my grandmother to the night before, was outside of the table under the umbrella eating brunch. The director's wife was sitting by his side. My grandmother looked well under the shade of the umbrella. The director began to talk about the death of a stuntman on one of his films. He talked about how he missed a step, of how he fell headfirst into the pavement below, which is the Shards, which is falling off of balconies in L.A., which is his common MO in the CIA book that we read, but in this is convenient or inconvenient death. He was a wonderful boy. He was only 18. My father opened another beer. My grandfather looked down sadly. What was his name? He asked. What? The director glanced up. What was his name? What was the kid's name? There was a long silence, and I could feel the desert breeze and the sound of the jacuzzi beating and the pool draining and Frank Sinatra singing Summer Wind, and I prayed that the director remembered the name. For some reason, it seemed very important to me. I wanted very badly for the director to say the name. The director opened his mouth and said, I forget. That's it. That's L.A. postmodernism right there. That's Bret Easton Ellis. We can see, he even uses the verb prayed. I prayed that he would remember his name. The kid is going to be his age. He's a stuntman diving headfirst into the pavement purposefully for entertainment's sake, right? It's on an entertainment set, and he's giving a surface level kind of false conversational eulogy, but he doesn't know his name. And Bret says, I prayed that he remembered his name. He doesn't remember his name. He forgets. I forget. Present tense. I forget. That's it. That's crazy, right? But that's I think it's important. And then, at the end of the book, let me find one of these other sections before I get off here. If you want to support, please make sure that you smash the like, share this stream, you guys. Share the stream out, add it to your playlists, share it somewhere, clip it. And I would especially appreciate, thank you, Jason, for adding that PayPal link right there. You can support me via PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. Those are the three best ways to get to me. You can also super chat. You can super chat on Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. Get right to me, and those are great ways to support me. And then also super chat. You can super chat me, ask me questions. Ask me questions. Write me an email at madmaximalism2x's at gmail.com. You can sponsor streams. You can do whatever. I think next I'll be reading this book, Our Band Can Be Your Life by Michael Azerrod. Michael Azerrod, about the early 80s into the 90s grunge scene. For a sponsor stream, I got a bunch of stuff coming up. But yeah, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, really appreciate that. Let me find one more section here, because the italicized sections are an insight into his psyche and his conscious mind lurking as a commentary on what he has to say about L.A. postmodernism. It was my grandfather's birthday, and we'd been in Palm Springs for close to 2 months, for too long. Page 123. The sun was hot, and the air was thick during those 2 weeks. It was lunchtime, and we were all sitting out beneath the overhang in front of the pool at the old house. I could remember that my grandmother had bought me a bag of rock candy that day, and I'd been chewing them constantly, nervously. The housekeeper brought out cold cuts and beer and Hawaiian punch and potato chips on a large wooden platter and set it down on the table my aunt and my grandmother and grandfather and mother and father and I were sitting at. My mother and aunt picked at the turkey sandwiches. My grandfather was wearing a straw hat and drank Michelob beer. My aunt was fanning herself with a People magazine. My grandmother hadn't been feeling well, and she nibbled at her sandwich lightly and sipped cold herb tea. My mother wasn't listening to any of the conversation. She was watching my sisters and cousins play in the pool, her eyes fixated on the cool aqua water. I think we've been here too long, my aunt said. That's an understatement, my father said, shifting in his chair. I want to leave, my aunt said in a very far-off voice, eyes distant, her fingers clenched around the magazine. Well, my grandfather spoke up. We better get out of here before too soon. I'm turning as red as a tamale. Right, Clay? He winked at me and opened his fifth beer. I'm going to make flight reservations today, my aunt said. One of my cousins was looking through a copy of the L.A. Times and mentioned something about a plane crash in San Diego. Everybody murmured, and plans for leaving were forgotten. They take private planes, and his granddad owns a bunch of hotels in Vegas and all this stuff. I think I would rather die in a plane crash than any other way, my father said after some time. I think it would be dreadful, but it would be nothing. You get bombed on the plane, take a Librium, and the plane takes off and crashes, and you never knew what hit you. My father crossed his legs. It was silent at the table. The only sound came from my sisters and cousins splashing in the water. What do you think, my aunt asked my mother. I try not to think about things like that, my mother said. What about you, Mom? My father asked my grandmother. My grandmother, who hadn't said anything all day, wiped her mouth and said very quietly, I wouldn't want to die in any way. And Bret is alienated from his father, who is a successful guy, a businessman, but it gets divorced from his mother. That occurs in the Shards, and then they're both gone all the time. And then the book ends. His sisters, though, play this funny game that that I think probably everybody here has played this. He says at one point, like, I love these little spices that are put into the book to give a sense of truth, not just realism, but they're truthful. He's walking outside. He's going to go meet his friends, and then his sisters say, "Watch us. We want you to judge who looks more dead in the pool." And they jump in the pool, and then they hold their breath. And he says, when he walks away, before he walks away, they're both floating face down in the pool, not blowing bubbles. So I think that's who hasn't played that game. I mean, have you guys played that game? I played that game I played that game all the time with my parents. I don't know why kids do that. I don't know why I did that when I was young, but tell me who looks more dead. And then I would lie in the pool and see if I could hold my breath longer than the other person just floating in the water. But of course, in the book, the juxtaposition here is between innocence and death, right? And of course, it foreshadows the later death in his later work in the Shards of his friend Bret, lying in the pool dead, and we get a sense of Brian Jones, right? what's Jim Morrison's poem about Brian Jones dead in L.A. in the pool, dead at 27 in L.A. Ophelia leaves sodden in silk, chlorine dream, mad stifled witness. The angel man finally claimed this benevolent soul. Right. Ophelia, he's a kind of a male Ophelia, lying dead in the pool. Last page is there was a song I heard when I was in Los Angeles by a local group. The song was called Los Angeles, and the words and images were so harsh and bitter that the song would reverberate in my mind for days. The images I later found out were personal, and no one I knew shared them. The images I had were of people being driven mad by living in the city. Images of parents who were so hungry and unfulfilled that they ate their own children. Images of people, teenagers my own age, looking up from the asphalt and being blinded by the sun. These images stayed with me even after I left the city. Images so violent and malicious that they seemed to be my only point of reference for a long time afterwards, after I left. And that's it. Dark L.A. postmodernism, so dark in the blaring sunlight of palm tree lined Los Angeles, right on the fault line, right in the Pacific sun, blown by the hot winds, surrounded by the desert and Death Valley, and a kind of site for apotheosis of postmodernistic nihilism into the obliteration of what became the Big Nine world. So that's it. That's Bret Easton Ellis, Less Than Zero, and the Shards. You can go back and watch my American Psycho Tour de Force stream. You can watch the Glamorama Monarch Model Assassins stream on Glamorama and Zoolander. You can watch the Lunar Park stream that I did. Lunar Park, again, is my favorite of the Bret Easton Ellis books. I think it's fabulous. In the last 20 pages of Lunar Park are some of the best prose writing that I've ever read. I mean, it really is crazy. And I don't know, and also I did the stream on J.G. Ballard's Cocaine Nights and The Informers by Bret Easton Ellis. JW drops $20 super chat. Thank you, JW, and says these private school Bret Easton Ellis characters hit close if you know people like this, but also make you wonder if you are or were them, which Bret Easton Ellis sometimes tries to do. Are you one of them? Dang, thank God for Jesus Christ. Yes. Well, thank God, thank God, thank Jesus Christ. Thank you, God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, for giving me some deliverance from this. And as far as the private school characters, yeah, well, my own book, which I'm still working on, I've shared it a little bit with you guys in the membership stream. My book is now called West Hampton, subtitled All the President's Kids. It's about 140 pages of this exact type of stuff. It's not exactly like that because there's no Skittles, there's none of that shit. I mean, I think that's maybe a West Coast thing or whatever, but certainly not East Coast or East Coast prep school. But there is a lot of stuff in there, and everybody, we all live our lives. We all confront death in a rite of passage. We all, at some point, we're aware that death exists, and we're no longer children. And then we have to, put childish things aside. When we were a child, we thought like a child, we acted like a child. When we became a man, you put childish things aside. And I think that, it's certainly a unique thing and a unique experience that is hard to. You can't just make a television show or a movie and show a certain experience that's different from everybody else's, because it never really permeates the surface. And I think Bret Easton Ellis in a lot of ways does do that in his writing, because we think in words, and reading words certainly helps us to plumb the depths and scale the heights of our experience, while we're here alive on Earth. So thank you so much, JW. I really appreciate that. And let's see if we got some other super chats. If anybody wants to support me, I really would appreciate it. And thank you so much for everybody for being here. Please go back and watch my old streams. I'm gonna probably reread Lunar Park for the like fourth time, just for fun coming up. Let's see. I don't want to dox your name here, but JG sends $5. Thank you so much for that $5 on PayPal. Oh yeah, that's Circle G. That's our friend Circle G here. One day I want to sponsor a couple streams. Would you be open to analyzing a youth writer? I read and loved a lot of Gary Paulson as a preteen. I actually have. Hold on, look at this. Speaking of that, I've actually got one right here. Here's a Gary Paulson dog song. I just got that in my stack. So yeah, I'd probably do that. I try to avoid books or subject matter that is going to deal with people that are not in our age group. Okay. Number one, for the algorithm and for the audience. But occasionally I dive into those things because I think that classic work for a younger audience, for ourselves, is particularly enriching because there's a lot of truth that we get from books that we read as kids that we probably should go back to and look at. I mean, I did the Peter Pan analyses with Jamie. I think that that's what Rimbaud was going for when he wrote Illuminations and A Season in Hell. I know that for a fact that he was going for that because there's a kind of encoded language of youth that we forget with the blinders of old age. So that might be something I would look into. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for that super chat. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much to our friend Real John Connor out there who dropped $25 and said, I'm doing it for my daughter. That's right. Yeah. Real John Connor and I have been sharing a lot of, I'm always sharing Dollar Stream and Sam Hyde clips, and I was particularly happy to see that Tusami clip come up. Because that one was, that one's become a classic. Thank you. Really appreciate that, Real John Connor. Thank you. I'm trying to think of a recent one that I've been. There's so many. You can watch Sam Hyde clips endlessly. They're always good. The one where he went off on the most recent one where he went off on the GAT people was very funny. But today I've been watching. I watched. Okay, so first of all, yeah, just as a side note. I watched for the last week. I've been watching. First, I watched like every like sword and fantasy movie, especially from the '80s. I watched The Sword and the Sorcerer. I watched Krull. I watched Beastmaster. I watched all those, and I actually realized something from Krull, which is that there's a scene in Krull where when they invade the castle, when the bad guys invade the castle, they float up the castle, and it looks exactly like in Dune and Dune 2. The characters look very similar, and I bet that was an unconscious decision that osmosis permeated through Denis Villeneuve's mind when he was staging that, because it looks very, very similar. Then I watched right now I'm into any shows or movies that are set on ships. I just, Claire from Canada made a good point and said, this is every man's, every man is drawn to the sea. We all want to, ride the crest of a cold wave and go exploring. And I think that's just part of it is a sign of me being a solitary creature and being inside. And not that I'm inside all the time, but I just mean that, I'm drawn to that. And I'm going to do Master and Commander soon, Master and Commando soon. But I watched Mutiny on the Bounty again, which is, I watched the Marlon Brando version. And then I watched The Bounty with, which is, as an amazing, U-571 is an amazing movie. White Squall. I covered White Squall in the Ridley Scott analysis. But The Bounty is an interesting movie because it's got, Anthony Hopkins. Sir, that's not what you do, sir, sir. That's the we do the whip, sir. But it's got Daniel Day-Lewis, Mel Gibson, Liam Neeson are all in the film. It's got an amazing cast. But the best thing about The Bounty by far is the Mel Gibson goes to the island and gets in this relationship with one of the Tahitian girls, and it's pretty cool. And the best thing about the movie by far is the Vangelis score. Vangelis is, I've been listening to, I put that up in the on the community tab, but I listened to Vangelis as a kind of backdrop for reading these Bret Easton Ellis books, which is perfect, the synth 80s. And I listened to Antarctica, his score for 1492 Conquest of Paradise. Then I watched that film, Ridley Scott film, which is, damn, it's a hard watch. But his score for his closing song for The Bounty, you can YouTube it, is amazing. I don't know. I listened to that song. I heard it when the movie was closing, and then I've listened to it like 300 times since then. And music has a way of noting your memory passages in your brain and striking them like a hammer chord. And it just like really like went straight into my heart. Something about that song, and it's just sweeping and beautiful and oceanic and deep, and it's a wonderful song. It's a wonderful score. And then today I've been just watching the video for Stone Roses, She Bangs the Drums, and I sent it to my friends, and I said, this is my favorite song of all time. It's not my favorite song of all time. That was hyperbole, but it is an important song to me. And my friend said, why? What were we doing 14 years ago? And I said, well, the video was probably put out it was uploaded 14 years ago, but the song is from Stone Roses. And I think it's because when I first moved to Belfast, Ian Brown had put out a song, and then he put out Fear, Fear, when I moved to England, and he was just a kind of a constant backdrop presence. And Stone Roses were very popular in Auntie Annie's in Belfast, and in at the Limelight. They would always play Stone Roses songs, and I really discovered Stone Roses when I lived in the UK. But when I listened to that song, She Bangs the Drums, and watched the video, it like doesn't get old. It's like, it's so beautiful to me. And what does he say in the song? The past was yours, but the future belongs to me. And it's beautiful, dude. It's a beautiful fucking song. Let me look up the lyrics to the song for the Stone Roses. She Bangs the Drums. Before I get off of here. Yeah, he says, I can feel the earth begin to move. I hear my needle hit the groove and spiral through another day. I hear my song begin to say, kiss me where the sun don't shine. The past was yours, but the future's mine. You're all out of time. I don't feel too steady on my feet. I feel hollow. I feel weak. Passion fruit and holy bread fill my guts and ease my head. Through the early morning sun, I can see her. Here she comes. She bangs the drums. God, it's a beautiful song, dude. It's a beautiful song. It's so good. Stone Roses, She Bangs the Drums. Beautiful song, man. It's so fucking good, dude. So good. So good. You don't out of time. Yeah, so shouts out to, let's see, I just got another one there. Yo, shouts out to, thank you for the support, you guys. People, human citizens, special beings. Really appreciate y'all. Yeah, shouts out to Ethan out there who drops $10 and says for wading through the postmodern bog. My pleasure, sir. I did it so you don't have to. Yes, thank you for that $10. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And let's see if we got any more super chats on here. I answered that one from JW for that $20. Thank you. Luchador 1764 sends $5 and says, "Yo, Based, I'm really happy for you. I'm gonna let you finish, but Dune 2 was one of the greatest movies of all time. Yes, I love Dune 2, and I'm happy to spurg out about Dune 2. I was really elated. I mean, I thought it was really fantastic. I'm glad that you share that sentiment. I'm also especially happy about it in light of recent movies. I'm going to go see Civil War when it comes out in a couple weeks, right? Alex Garland movie for sure. I'm going to see that. Probably see the new David Dasmalchian movie or whatever. I'll probably see that and a couple other ones, but I'll be doing some movie analyses coming up. Thank you for that $5. Really appreciate you. Yeah, dead tech postmodern. You live here in your dead tech postmodernistic bullshit. What are you, a monk? I got a woman. I wonder when Heat 2, the movie's going to come out. Right, remember? We covered that a long time ago. Go back and watch my Heat and Heat 2 analyses. Those were way back. What does Jim Morrison say? Way back. I'm sick of these stinky boots, he says in that poem. Yeah, Civil War does look interesting. Hey, BLA, do you like Modest Mouse? I never really got into Modest. I know Modest. I don't know them personally, but I know Modest Mouse, but I never really got into Modest Mouse. I like Built to Spill. I liked one of the best concerts I ever. Bill Hicks says Heat is so overrated. Hell no, it's not. He says sorry. It's okay. It's okay. We all have our opinions. There are a lot of movies that I think are overrated that are called classics. My biggest is the Shawshank Redemption. I can't stand the Shawshank Redemption. Don't be mad at me because everybody loves the Shawshank Redemption, but I've always hated that movie. I hate it. But we won't go into that. So I understand, but yeah, Heat is a great movie. Built to Spill was why I came to this stream. Hey, Kit, that's awesome. Yeah, I love Built to Spill. One of the best concerts I ever saw was Death Cab for Cutie at a bar in Bristol when I lived in England by myself in 2003. One of the best concerts I've ever seen. So yeah, Jethro says The Dark Knight. Yeah, everybody says that everybody loves The Dark Knight, and Jethro and I kind of share that sentiment. So, but I gotta say, I've talked a lot of mess about that silly Billy Hans Zimmer, but I either love Hans Zimmer scores or I hate him. I do not like his scores for the Batman movies, but I do like his scores for his Denis Villeneuve movies. So, I guess he's a wide-ranging artist. Strokes open for Guided by Voices. I saw Strokes at a festival in DC. The Strokes, I really like one of the Strokes albums, Angles. I really like that, and I like Julian Casablancas' solo EP. His first album that he made is really good. Have I done the Sicario movies? No. Maybe I should do those. Yeah, because they're Denis Villeneuve. I've done Prisoners. I've talked about Blade Runner 2049. I've done, what else? We don't really need to do Arrival, but I haven't done Sicario. Yeah, so, but yeah, I love Heat. Anyway, guys, that's probably about it for me tonight. Please make sure you like and share the stream. Help me get these numbers up. Don't forget you can catch me all the time, usually on Fridays on TNT Radio Live, where I contribute to that channel with on Hesher's show. I was recently on there with Joseph Arthur. I'm hoping to get something maybe in the future. Maybe I can get a talk with Jason Burmis. That'll be cool. who is on TNT. He's been doing a show on TNT. That'd be really cool. And help me to get out there. Help me to get these numbers up. I'm trying to get my numbers up. We've been going up, but still need to get them up. And please make sure you leave suggestions after the stream is over for what you want me to do. Leave some book suggestions. I'll be doing a music stream coming up for Daniel. That's a sponsor stream. If you want to sponsor a stream, drop $100 to PayPal or Cash App or Venmo. Only those, please. Give me some suggestions, what you want to see. I'll be doing Master and Commander also soon. That's another one we got coming up. We got a bunch of them coming up. But yeah, Little Romance now for a pal. Yeah, I should probably do True Romance, the Charlie XCX album and the movie. But thank you guys. Really appreciate you all. Thank you for being here, and I love you. Peace. And remember, was it worth it? Yeah, it's worth it if you're strong enough. That's right. The past was yours. The future's mine. Shouts out to Rooks G. Please make sure you go and sub to his channel. Go to his Instagram. This is Rooks G, ROOXG. You can support me anytime. Make sure you like the stream. Love you guys. Thank you. That was Bret Easton Ellis. Yeah, no Yorgios movies. Fuck. I'm drinking my Rip It. That's what I've been drinking tonight. Shards. Bret Easton Ellis. Hey, one super chat I missed. Hey, thank you to Mr. Terrible in the chat. Thank you. Said drops $25 and says enjoy your work. Thank you, Mr. Terrible. Really appreciate that. And to Jason, our friend who drops $10. Thank you so much, Jason. And here's another one. And to Circle G who drops $5 one day. I want to sponsor a stream. Thank you so much. Really appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate your kindness and generosity. Thank you. Thanks, y'all. Peace. Love y'all.
Now let's go around the world in 80 ways in space as we capture the international fleet to see how the world's fair in the skies. Here are scientific crossroads that symbolize the international